My name is Nicole Blake, 24 years old. If you'd asked my parents who mattered most in our family, they wouldn't have said it out loud, but they wouldn't have needed to. The answer had always been obvious. My older sister, Zephyr, had been the center of gravity since the day she was born, and the rest of us just learned how to orbit around her moods, her needs, her disasters, and her second chances. I grew up watching that dynamic harden into something permanent, something unquestioned. By the time we were adults, it wasn't even favoritism anymore. It was policy. I was still living at home, not because I loved it, but because it made sense. I worked full-time at a warehouse that paid decent enough to survive, not decent enough to magically buy a house in this economy. I paid rent, real rent. Not symbolic money, not helping out when I could, but a fixed amount every month that went straight to my parents. On top of that, I covered my own expenses, pitched in for groceries, and fixed things around the house whenever something broke. I wasn't freeloading, I was contributing. Zephyr, on the other hand, had moved out at 20 to live with her boyfriend-turned-husband Maverick. Even saying his name felt like tempting fate. He was the kind of man who always had a reason for why nothing ever worked out for him. 7 jobs in 3 years, each ending with a story about toxic workplaces, unfair bosses, or people who just didn't get his potential. Somehow, none of those failures ever stuck to him. They just slid off and landed on someone else. The morning everything broke open started like any other. I was at the kitchen table, eating cereal, half listening to the hum of the refrigerator while scrolling through my phone, mentally preparing for another long shift. My mom walked in, coffee in hand, calm in that way that should have warned me something was coming. "Zephyr and Maverick are moving into your room this weekend," she said. Just like that. No build-up, no question, no warning. I looked up at her, sure I'd misheard. What? My dad didn't even glance up from his newspaper. They lost their apartment. I waited for more. An explanation. An apology. Something that acknowledged this involved me. Nothing came. "Why my room?" I asked finally. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from farther away. Mom shrugged. "You can sleep on the pull-out couch in the den." The den. A narrow, awkward space that acted more like a hallway than a room. The pull-out couch itself was ancient, its metal bar infamous for digging directly into your spine no matter how you positioned yourself. It squeaked if you breathed too hard. It was uncomfortable on purpose, like punishment disguised as furniture. "Did you even talk to me about this?" I asked. "Honey," she said, softening her voice in that way she always did when she wanted something from me. "Zephyr's pregnant. They need the space more than you do." There it was, the trump card, pregnancy, the word that erased all logic, all fairness, all discussion. Suddenly, my room wasn't mine anymore. My comfort didn't matter. My rent didn't matter. My existence became secondary to something that hadn't even been born yet. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. "I'm telling you now," she replied, genuinely confused by my tone. "No," I said quietly. "You're informing me. You already decided." Dad folded his paper with a sharp snap and finally looked at me. "Don't make this difficult, Nicole. Family helps family." I almost laughed. That phrase had only ever traveled in one direction in our house. I said fine. Not because it was fine, but because fighting in that moment felt pointless. They were already planning how to rearrange my room, already discussing what furniture Zephyr would want where. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and left for work with my chest tight and my thoughts spinning. Somewhere between the warehouse floor and the rhythm of lifting boxes, a small dangerous idea started forming. I pushed it down, told myself I was overreacting, that I was being selfish. That's what years of conditioning will do to you. It teaches you to doubt your own pain. By Friday, Zephyr and Maverick arrived with 2 carloads of stuff. I didn't understand how people who'd been evicted could own that much junk, but there it was spilling into the driveway, and somehow I was expected to help carry it. Zephyr directed everything like she owned the place. "No, that goes against the other wall. Be careful with that box. It has my crystals." She said it seriously, like those rocks were more fragile than my boundaries. Maverick supervised. His back apparently was acting up again. Funny how it only hurt when there was actual work to do. My things, my clothes, my books, my personal stuff were shoved into plastic bins and slid under the basement stairs. I hadn't packed them. Mom had done it while I was at work. I tried not to think about what might be missing. That night on the pull-out couch was worse than I remembered. The metal bar pressed into my back like it was trying to mark territory. Every time someone walked through the den to the kitchen or laundry room, the light flicked on the noise, jolted me awake. I stared at the ceiling, listening to muffled laughter coming from my old room, my bed, my space. The next morning, I tiptoed through the kitchen at 5 a.m. to get ready for work. When I came home that evening, exhausted and sore, my mom asked, "How'd you sleep?" "Like crap," I said. She frowned. "Language. You know Zephyr doesn't like negativity around the baby." I tried. I really did. I kept paying rent. I mowed the lawn, fixed the Wi-Fi when it went down, took out trash Maverick left piled by the door. Meanwhile, they treated the house like a resort. Dishes piled up. Food I bought disappeared. Hot water vanished every morning. 2 weeks in, I came home to find Maverick wearing my favorite hoodie, the limited edition one I'd saved for. "That's mine," I said. Zephyr didn't even look up from her phone. "Relax. It's just a hoodie. You're so uptight." That same night, my mom sat me down. "Since there are more people in the house now, the bills are going up. We were hoping you could contribute more." I stared at her, something cold settling in my stomach. I paid more. They paid nothing. And I slept on a couch. That night, lying awake again, listening to laughter from behind the walls, I felt something shift. Not anger yet, not action, just the slow, unmistakable realization that if I didn't draw a line soon, this would never end. And somewhere deep down, a question I'd avoided my whole life finally surfaced: what would happen if I stopped playing my role? The next morning, I woke up with a stiff back and a heavier truth pressing down on me than the metal bar ever could. I stood there in the den, rubbing the soreness out of my spine, staring at the ceiling fan that never quite worked right. And for the first time, it occurred to me that this setup wasn't temporary in anyone else's mind. It was only temporary for me, as long as I kept enduring it quietly. I kept doing what I always did. I went to work. I paid my rent. I fixed things when they broke. I told myself that being the bigger person was the mature choice, even as that phrase started to taste sour in my mouth. Every night I unfolded that ancient couch, listening to its joints creak like it was complaining on my behalf, and tried to convince myself this was what family sacrifice looked like. It didn't take long for the disrespect to stop being subtle. Zephyr and Maverick fully settled into my old room like they'd been there forever. My posters were gone, my shelves rearranged, my bedspread replaced with something pastel and aggressively calming. I caught glimpses of my life disappearing every time I walked past the door. It felt like watching someone else live in my skin. They didn't clean, ever. Dishes sat in the sink until they developed a smell that made my stomach turn. Empty food containers piled up on the counter right next to the trash can Maverick apparently couldn't be bothered to open. Hot water was always gone by the time I got home from work, and if I mentioned it, Zephyr would sigh dramatically and remind me that pregnancy was exhausting. Anything I bought for myself vanished. Protein bars, yogurt, leftovers. Once I found Zephyr in the kitchen, eating the last of something I'd labeled with my name. "Oh," she said around a mouthful, not even apologetic. "I didn't know that was yours." "It literally says my name on it." "God, Nicole," she snapped. "You're so territorial." Territorial. Over my own food. Over the scraps of autonomy I still had left. Maverick got bolder too. He lounged on the couch, my sleeping space, during the day like it belonged to him. He borrowed things without asking. Wore my clothes. Used my razor and left it clogged with beard hair, dull and ruined. When I confronted Zephyr about it, she waved me off like I was complaining about the weather. "He needed to clean up for a job interview," she said. I wanted to ask which interview, considering he spent most of his time glued to his phone, laughing at videos or yelling at his game. But I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. The real slap came a few nights later when my mom sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded, like she was about to deliver bad news at a doctor's office. "Your father and I were talking," she said. "With more people in the house, expenses are higher. We were hoping you could increase your contribution." I laughed before I could stop myself. It came out sharp and ugly. "You want me to pay more, after giving away my room?" "Well," she said carefully, "Zephyr and Maverick can't help right now." Of course they couldn't. He was still looking, and she needed to focus on the baby. Focus apparently meant filming TikToks about cravings and mood swings while I financed the utilities. "So let me get this straight," I said. "I lose my room. I sleep on a broken couch, and now I pay extra so they can live here for free." Mom frowned. "Don't be dramatic." "Family helps family," she added like a spell meant to calm me down. That night I couldn't sleep at all. Not because of the couch, though it didn't help, but because I could hear them through the wall. Laughing, joking. talking about me like I wasn't even a real person. She's always been like this, Zephyr said. So possessive. Yeah, Maverick agreed. She needs to chill. I stared at the ceiling, my jaw clenched, and something inside me hardened. Not into rage, not yet, but into clarity. I realized then that no amount of patience would earn me respect. No amount of money would buy me consideration. I could give and give until there was nothing left, and they would still ask for more. The next morning, I found a note on the counter. Utilities are higher this month. Can you cover the difference? No, please. No, thank you. Just expectation. I folded the note slowly and slipped it into my pocket, my hands steady, even though my chest felt tight. I went to work, lifted boxes, followed the same routine, but inside I was quietly counting. Counting the ways I'd been taken for granted, counting how long I'd allowed it. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for being angry. I felt awake. Once that awareness settled in, it didn't leave. It followed me everywhere, into the warehouse aisles, into the noise of conveyor belts and forklifts, into the quiet moments when I sat alone in my car before going back inside that house. I started noticing things I'd trained myself to ignore. The way my parents only spoke to me when something needed fixing. The way Zephyr spoke about me, never to me like I was an obstacle instead of a person. The way Maverick acted, entitled to anything that wasn't nailed down. I stopped volunteering information, stopped offering help before being asked. It was subtle, but the shift was there and they felt it. They just didn't like it. The house grew louder. Zephyr started having friends over, people just like her and Maverick, drifting through life, staying late on weeknights, laughing too loudly. While I lay on that couch, staring at the ceiling, calculating how many hours of sleep I'd get before my alarm went off at 5. When I complained, my mom sighed and told me Zephyr needed emotional support during her pregnancy. Apparently, I didn't need sleep before operating heavy machinery. The moment that snapped whatever restraint I had left came one afternoon when I came in through the garage earlier than usual. I stopped when I heard my name. I don't understand why Nicole has to be so difficult about everything Zephyr was saying in that whiny tone she'd perfected as a child. It's like she resents the baby already. She's always been jealous, my mom replied without hesitation. Ever since you were kids. I stood there unseen, my hand still on the door handle, my pulse pounding in my ears. Maybe she should just move out if she's so unhappy, Zephyr continued. Maverick could use the den as a home office once his online business takes off. My mom lowered her voice. We can't push her out. Her rent helps with the mortgage. There it was. Clean. Undeniable. I wasn't a daughter in that conversation. I was a line item. I backed away slowly, my chest tight, like someone had reached inside and twisted something vital. All those years of telling myself they cared, that they were just flawed, that family meant enduring, gone in an instant. It wasn't love that kept me there. It was convenience. I avoided them for days after that, picking up overtime, staying late, anything to delay going home. But you can't hide forever. About 6 weeks after they moved in, I was grabbing my keys to leave for work when Maverick came out of my old room, stretching like he owned the place. Hey, Nicole, he said casually. Can I borrow your car today? Got a solid lead on a job across town. My car. The one thing that was truly mine. The thing I'd saved for protected, depended on. What happened to yours? I asked. He shrugged. Sold it. Of course he did. It's just for today, he added. Zephyr already talked to your parents. They said it's fine. Something in me went still. No, I said. He blinked. What? I said no. His face shifted instantly, friendliness evaporating. Don't be a jerk. She's pregnant. What does that have to do with my car? If I get this job, we can start saving for the baby, he shot back. Don't you care about your niece or nephew? The old guilt flared instinctively and then burned out just as fast. Your employment is not my responsibility, I said evenly. Neither is your transportation. He stormed off, muttering insults under his breath. Within an hour, my phone lit up with messages. Mom, Dad, Zephyr, all of them furious, all of them disappointed in me. I turned my phone off. That night, they staged an intervention. I walked into the living room to find all of them sitting there waiting, like I was the problem that needed fixing. Dad started with his serious voice. We need to talk about your attitude. I laughed. I couldn't help it. My attitude, I repeated. You take my room, charge me more rent, expect me to bankroll people who contribute nothing, and I'm the issue. Mom tried to soothe things. Nicole, don't. No, I cut in. My voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. I'm done. The room went silent. Either I get my room back, I continued, and I keep paying rent, or I stay exactly like this and I stop paying entirely. You can't just stop paying, Dad said, panic slipping through his authority. Watch me. Zephyr rolled her eyes. God, you're unbelievable. Then pay for the space you're taking, I shot back. Dad stood trying to loom. As long as you live under this roof. Then here are your options, I interrupted. Decide by tomorrow. I walked out keys in hand and spent the night in my car. It wasn't comfortable, but for the first time in weeks I slept. And when my dad texted me the next day saying they needed my contribution and Zephyr and Maverick were staying, I knew exactly what I was going to do. They'd chosen. So would I. They probably expected me to fold. That was the funny part. When I came back to the house after work that evening, I didn't announce anything. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I just existed. I dropped my bag by the door, took off my shoes, and sat down on the good couch, the one no one ever used because it was for guests. I turned on the TV and stretched out like I belonged there. My mom stared at me like she was watching a glitch in reality. I thought you were moving out, she said slowly. Nope, I replied, not looking away from the screen. I'm staying. Her face tightened. But the rent. I told you my terms, I said calmly. You chose the other option. Dad stepped in, his voice sharp. Nicole, you can't just live here for free. I finally looked at him. Funny. That logic didn't seem to apply to everyone. The silence that followed was thick and uneasy. I could feel something cracking beneath the surface, but none of them wanted to acknowledge it yet. They still thought this was a standoff I'd lose, that I'd get uncomfortable, feel guilty, cave like I always had. I didn't. That week, I went to the bank and opened a new account at a completely different branch. I moved every dollar I had into it, canceled my automatic transfers, quietly severed the invisible leash they'd had wrapped around my finances for years. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. They'd find out soon enough. And I stayed. I stayed right there in that house, eating breakfast, watching TV, coming and going, like nothing had changed, except everything had. The first thing I stopped worrying about was the thermostat. For as long as I could remember, it was an unspoken rule that the AC never went below 73. Anything lower, and my dad would start ranting about the electric bill. But that bill wasn't my problem anymore. I turned it down to 65 and left it there. When Dad turned it back up, I waited until he left the room and turned it right back down. The house felt like an icebox in July, and I slept better than I had in months. Zephyr complained constantly about being cold, wrapping herself in blankets and sighing dramatically about how bad it was for the baby. I took long showers too, luxuriously long, 30 minutes sometimes. I stood there under the hot water, letting the tension drain out of me, listening to Zephyr bang on the door about her pregnant bladder. I turned my music up louder and stayed right where I was. In the kitchen, I cooked for myself. Real meals. Not enough to share. When my mom asked why I hadn't made more, I shrugged. I bought the groceries, I said. Why would I cook for everyone? By the end of the second week, the cracks started showing. Past due notices appeared on the counter. The Wi-Fi cut out one afternoon, and Maverick lost his mind like someone had taken his oxygen. I switched to my phone data and kept scrolling. When Zephyr complained about the food situation, how there was nothing to eat, I opened the mini fridge I'd bought and locked in the den, pulled out a steak, and closed it again without a word. They were furious, but they were also powerless. The house started to feel different, heavier, dirtier. No one cleaned anymore. I wasn't about to. Zephyr and Maverick never had. Dishes piled up. Laundry overflowed. The lawn went unmowed. My parents fought constantly, their arguments hushed but intense, full of numbers and panic. One night my mom cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes red. We're behind on the mortgage, she said quietly. I didn't look up from my sandwich. Not my problem. She slammed her hand on the counter. Why are you doing this? Why can't you just help your family? I met her gaze, then really met it. I did help, for years. And you took everything I gave and asked for more. She didn't have an answer. By the end of the second month, the electricity got shut off for a full day. The house fell silent, hot and miserable. Zephyr cried. Maverick complained. My parents scrambled. I charged my phone in my car and watched the chaos like a spectator. That was when Dad finally broke. He pulled me aside one evening looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. What do you want? He asked. What will fix this? I took a breath. I'll take over the mortgage. Hope flickered across his face until I finished the sentence. But the house goes in my name, and Zephyr and Maverick leave. The look on his face told me everything. They were running out of options, and for the first time in my life, they knew it. The next week passed in a kind of strained silence, the sort that pressed against your ears, even when no one was speaking. My parents moved through the house like ghosts, whispering to each other in corners, papers spread across the dining table at night. Zephyr, on the other hand, seemed completely oblivious, or maybe she just refused to believe reality applied to her. She complained about the Wi-Fi, the food, the temperature, the stress, the baby shower she was planning, like none of this was happening. Maverick did what he always did, nothing. He paced, sulked, muttered about the economy, and played games on his phone, occasionally declaring he had another promising lead. No leads ever materialized. I said nothing. I'd made my offer. The ball was in their court. The family meeting happened on a Tuesday night. My dad called us all into the living room, his shoulders slumped, his voice flat in a way I'd never heard before. My mom sat beside him, hands clenched in her lap, eyes already glossy. Zephyr plopped down on the love seat, annoyed at being interrupted Maverick, hovering near her like a bodyguard who didn't know what he was guarding. "The bank has started foreclosure proceedings," Dad said. The word landed heavy. Zephyr's head snapped up. "What about my baby shower next month?" It was so on brand it almost hurt. "We can't afford it," my mom whispered. "We can't afford much of anything." Dad took a breath. "Nicole has offered a solution." Zephyr frowned. "What solution?" "He'll take over the mortgage," Dad continued, his eyes fixed on the floor, "and the house will be transferred into her name." For a moment, no one reacted. Then Zephyr shrieked. "You're giving her the house!" Her voice cracked on the word like it was an insult. "That's insane." "We don't have a choice," Mom said, tears finally spilling over. "It's this, or we lose everything." Zephyr turned on me like a spotlight. "You did this. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I offered a way out. You didn't like the terms. She started crying loud and dramatic, the way she always had when things didn't go her way. Maverick puffed up beside her, muttering about fairness and family and how this wasn't right. Dad shut it all down with a tired wave of his hand. "It's done," he said. "We're meeting with a lawyer tomorrow." The paperwork took weeks. Meetings, signatures, documents I'd never imagined I'd be reading at 24. Sitting in that lawyer's office felt surreal. My parents looked like they were attending their own funeral signing. Away the house they'd raised us in because they'd backed themselves into a corner they couldn't escape. Zephyr didn't even show up. She said the stress wasn't good for the baby. The day the final confirmation came through, I sat alone in my car and stared at the email until the words blurred. The house was mine. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. That night, while Zephyr and Maverick were out, I moved my things back into my room. Every shirt, every book, every piece of myself they'd pushed aside. Their belongings went into trash bags lined up neatly in the garage. When they came home and saw me sitting on my bed like nothing had ever changed, Zephyr lost it. "You can't do this!" she screamed, storming into the room without knocking. "I'm pregnant." I paused my game and looked at her calmly. "My house, my rules. You have 2 weeks to leave." Her face drained of color. "You wouldn't kick out your own sister," she said weakly. "I absolutely would," I replied. 2 weeks. She ran to our parents, expecting rescue. For the first time, it didn't come. The 2 weeks that followed were some of the loudest and quietest days of my life at the same time. Loud with arguments, slammed doors, and tearful phone calls. Quiet in the way that matters, because for the first time, no one's feelings mattered more than mine. Zephyr cycled through every tactic she'd perfected over the years. One moment she was crying, telling me I was heartless, that the stress could hurt the baby, that I'd regret this forever. The next she was furious, accusing me of stealing what was supposed to be hers, reminding me of all the times she'd been my sister, as if proximity alone counted as kindness. Maverick tried intimidation once, standing a little too close, puffing out his chest and muttering about how they weren't leaving. I mentioned his probation officer. He backed off after that. My parents hovered awkwardly, unsure of their role now that the power dynamic had flipped so completely. My mom tried to mediate at first, asking if we could find a compromise. I shut that down immediately. "You lost the right to negotiate when you signed the house over," I told her, not unkindly, just firmly. "This is between me and them." Dad stayed mostly silent, watching everything unfold with a kind of stunned respect I'd never seen from him before. I think for the first time he realized how far they'd pushed me and how much resolve it took to push back. Zephyr and Maverick spent those 2 weeks doing almost nothing to find a new place. They were convinced I'd cave, that Mom would wear me down, that something would magically fix it. On the 14th day, I changed the Wi-Fi password and shut off the hot water to the bathroom they'd been using. By that evening, they were packing. They left for Maverick's parents' house, where, according to the bits of gossip that trickled back, freeloading wasn't tolerated. Maverick got a job at a gas station within a month. Funny how necessity works. Once they were gone, I turned my attention to my parents. I wasn't cruel enough to kick them out. They were still my parents, still flawed, still human. But things couldn't go back to the way they were. We sat down at the kitchen table, and this time I led the meeting. They would pay rent, less than I used to, but enough to establish reality. Utilities would be split evenly. Everyone cleaned up after themselves. And the phrase family helps family would never again be used as an excuse to take advantage of me. Mom cried. Dad argued briefly, then stopped when I reminded him what market rent looked like. The adjustment period was awkward. They caught themselves mid-command, remembering that I wasn't a child anymore, that this wasn't their house. The shift was obvious. They asked before having guests, before changing things, before assuming. The house grew calmer, lighter. Without Zephyr's constant chaos, dinners became normal. Conversations happened without competition. And financially, everything stabilized. Bills got paid, repairs got done. For the first time, the house felt like a home. 3 months later, Zephyr had her baby, a boy named Phoenix, because of course. Mom babysat sometimes, but they weren't welcome at my house. Too much history, too many scars. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit in my room, and think about how close I'd come to losing myself trying to keep everyone else comfortable. I wondered if I could have handled things differently. Then I remembered the pull-out couch, the rent increase, the expectation that I'd disappear quietly. I didn't regret burning the bridge. Some bridges only exist so people can walk all over you.